7 amazing cosmic connections. Hello and welcome to my channel. Do you believe that there is an invisible web of destiny in the universe? From the microscopic to the vast dance of galaxies, the universe seems to be woven together by an unseen force. What's even more shocking is that, like the butterfly effect, these seemingly unattainable connections can affect our lives, even every breath we take. Everything seems to leave a tremor in this invisible web, and these tiny vibrations will affect the existence of other corners in unforeseen ways. Today, we will unravel the secrets together. 1. Butterfly effect. When it comes to the butterfly effect, I think an image will come to your mind. A butterfly flaps its wings in Brazil, and as a result, it triggers a hurricane in a corner of North America. It sounds incredible, right? But in reality, the concept has a very interesting origin and a complex scientific background. The concept of the butterfly effect originated with meteorologist Edward Lorenz, who, in 1961, accidentally made a startling discovery while performing calculations using a simplified weather model. When he reduced the numerical precision of certain initial conditions by a little bit, for example, modifying from 0.506127 to 0.506, the result of the calculation was completely different. This small change actually triggered completely different weather results. This made Lorenz on the accuracy of weather forecasts have deep doubts, but also prompted him to put forward the concept of initial conditions of sensitivity, which was later referred to as the butterfly effect. Lorenz compared this phenomenon to a butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil, which could trigger a hurricane in Texas, USA. Although this is only an analogy, it profoundly reveals the characteristics of a chaotic system. Even a small perturbation may be amplified and ultimately have a huge impact on the system. The butterfly effect makes us realize that many complex systems, e.g., weather, atmospheric flows, ecosystems, etc., are so sensitive that even trivial initial conditions can lead to completely different outcomes. This is especially true in nature. We see weather forecasts, for example, which are relatively accurate in the short term, but become less accurate the further back in time we go, as small changes can be amplified over time, creating unpredictable chaos. To give a more specific example, if you feed two similar weather conditions into a supercomputer model, the model may give completely different results based on subtle differences. The slightest difference in temperature, humidity, or barometric pressure can make all the difference in the world. This phenomenon is not limited to weather forecasting, but affects many aspects of our lives. For example, stock markets, social networks, ecological balances, and even human behavior patterns are all highly complex systems. In these systems, tiny factors can trigger a series of unpredictable consequences. The butterfly effect is an important part of chaos theory. Chaos theory studies nonlinear, unpredictable systems that are usually very sensitive to initial conditions and exhibit a high degree of dependence on small changes. Chaos does not imply complete randomness, but rather a high degree of regularity and extreme sensitivity to initial conditions. Chaotic systems have no obvious rules, but they are not completely disordered either. They exhibit a kind of liminal order, i.e., they appear to be disordered on the surface, but in fact there is an underlying regularity. Let's look at a simple example, a swinging pendulum. You may think that its movement is very regular, especially when there is no external interference. However, if you look closely, the pendulum's motion is actually extremely sensitive. Even if you change its starting angle slightly, the path and period of the swing will change. It's like a tiny perturbation in a chaotic system triggering a huge change in the amplification process. In a chaotic system, every small difference gradually amplifies over time, culminating in an unpredictable and complex outcome. This sensitivity has led to the application of the butterfly effect in many disciplines, especially in meteorology, ecology, and economics. In Russia at the beginning of the 20th century, a small and seemingly ordinary event triggered a chain reaction that eventually led to the fall of an empire. This is the story of a letter. In 1905, Tsarist Russia was in the midst of an internal and external crisis. The Russian people were becoming increasingly dissatisfied with the corrupt Tsarist government. On a cold winter day, a group of workers decided to unite and petition the Tsar to improve their working conditions and living environment. They wrote a letter full of expectations and pleas to the government, and even had a somewhat pleading tone. They hoped that the Tsar would sympathize with the people's plight and take measures to alleviate social conflicts. However, the letter was not taken seriously by the Tsar. When these peaceful workers gathered in front of the Winter Palace, the Tsar's troops opened fire to disperse the crowd, causing hundreds of casualties. What became known as Bloody Sunday shocked the whole of Russia and ignited the flames of revolution throughout the country. A well-intentioned petition, like a butterfly flapping its wings, eventually triggered a storm of revolution. A few years later, the Russian Revolution of 1917 erupted, Tsar Nicholas II was overthrown, and the Russian Empire came to an end. This example vividly demonstrates the butterfly effect. A small event such as a letter, through complex social and historical conditions, is continuously amplified and ultimately brews into an earth-shaking event. The global financial crisis of 2008 is also a classic example of the butterfly effect. Although it was not caused by a single butterfly wing, the outbreak and spread of the crisis did show how a small change could trigger a large-scale market crash. The story begins with the real estate market in the U.S. In the early 2000s, U.S. banks and financial institutions provided large numbers of subprime loans to high-risk borrowers in order to facilitate the purchase of real estate. These loans were usually given to borrowers with bad credit and poor repayment ability, which was considered at the time to be an investment that could yield high returns in the short term. But as the butterfly effect suggests, this small change triggered massive and unpredictable economic shocks later in the process. 2006 to 2007, the U.S. real estate market began to decline. Many borrowers were unable to make their payments on time, leading to a flood of home foreclosures and a devaluation of bank assets. Even though these changes seemed relatively limited at first, or were short-term market adjustments, they gradually extended to the global financial system. At this point, the problems did not manifest themselves directly, but rather erupted in a gradually expanding manner. Between 2007 and 2008, signals of problems began to show up in the financial markets, such as the distress of some large financial institutions, e.g., Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers, culminating in the announcement of Lehman Brothers' bankruptcy in September 2008 and an instantaneous butterfly effect in the financial markets. Although the collapse of Lehman Brothers was only the bankruptcy of one financial institution, it became the trigger for the collapse of the entire financial market. Investors began to panic, and the speed and magnitude of the stock market's decline far exceeded expectations, plunging the market into an unprecedented state of panic. At the same time, the stock prices of other financial institutions also fell sharply, and the stock market was affected on a global scale. When Lehman Brothers collapsed, investor panic quickly spread to stock markets around the world. In the U.S. stock market, the Standard & Poor's 500 index and the Dow Jones index plummeted by nearly 500 points each. And in Europe, Germany's DAX and Britain's FTSE 100 also fell sharply. Meanwhile, the share prices of other financial institutions continued to sink, and the exposure of credit risks across the market led to more capital outflows and greater market volatility. More interestingly, the volatility in share prices of financial institutions did not only affect the financial sector, but also spread to other sectors such as consumer and technology. It became more difficult for many companies to raise capital in the capital markets, and the decline in the stock market had a broader economic impact. For example, due to financial constraints, many companies have had to cut back on investments, lay off employees, and even go bankrupt, further exacerbating the negative sentiment in the market and ultimately creating a vicious cycle. On top of this, the amplification of this butterfly effect was exacerbated by the rapid spread of social media and news. In 2008, social media was not yet as prevalent as it is today, but the market's reaction to the news of Lehman Brothers' bankruptcy had quickly extended to the sentiments of investors and consumers across the globe, thanks to the dissemination of news reports and online forums. For example, investors quickly spread panic on stock forums and news sites, with many engaging in selling operations based on negative perceptions of certain stocks. This behavior is itself a manifestation of the butterfly effect, as the individual decisions of each investor ultimately converge into a massive market reaction that leads to a stock market crash. Such examples are not only found everywhere in the financial market, but also remind us that when facing a complex system, we cannot ignore any minor changes, as they may become the key point to change the situation. The butterfly effect is not just a scientific concept, it also makes us think deeply about human perception. We are accustomed to thinking that many things in the world happen with a certain causal relationship, especially for phenomena that we can observe. But the butterfly effect reveals a complex and profound truth. Even though many of the events we can perceive seem random, there may be some kind of law at work behind them that we can't readily recognize. Philosophers have also explored this point. For example, in the book Chaos and Order, the author mentions that our world seems to appear chaotic and disordered at certain moments, but by looking deeper, we can see a subtle order hidden within. Human cognition is always limited, and there are many things that we can't predict or control in the moment, but they still follow some kind of inner law. The butterfly effect brings us a revelation, a deep understanding of complex systems. It reminds us that the small and seemingly insignificant things in life may have unforeseeable and far-reaching effects in the future. This idea applies not only to natural phenomena, but also to our daily lives, social interactions, and even the functioning of the world as a whole. Although the butterfly effect essentially reveals the unpredictability of the system, it also makes us realize how closely we are connected to the world. Every little thing can be a great force for changing the future. 2. Human spiritual connection with nature. Have you ever walked through a forest in the early morning, listening to the sound of the leaves gently swaying and feeling a deep connection with nature? Or when looking out over the distant landscape from the top of a mountain, have you ever felt a sudden, inexpressible sense of tranquility, as if the entire universe had become one with you? These experiences may not just be enjoyment of the senses, but behind them there seems to be a deeper, unseen connection. This connection is a spiritual resonance between man and nature, a potential deep connection between us and nature. The natural world, or nature, has long been seen as a vast, outside world that provides us with oxygen, food, resources, and even comfort. Perhaps you have noticed that whenever you are in nature's embrace, whether it is a vast grassland or a quiet forest, you feel a sense of silent peace. In these places, time seems to slow down and thoughts become clear and fluid. Have you ever had the feeling, standing on the top of a mountain or by the sea, suddenly feel like you are one with the world, as if you have found a spiritual home? This feeling may be a reflection of the deep connection between humans and nature. Many people have some kind of deep emotional resonance when they are confronted with nature. This is no accident. In fact, scientists have begun to pay more and more attention to this spiritual connection. There is a theory called biophilia hypothesis, proposed by Harvard University biologist Edward Osborne Wilson. According to Wilson, the human mind has a natural affinity with the natural world, just as we are naturally comfortable with certain sights and sounds, e.g., running water, birdsong, greenery. The central idea of this theory is that we feel peaceful and content because we share a common evolutionary history with the natural world. For millions of years, our ancestors have lived in natural environments, and their existence was closely tied to the rhythms of nature. Thus, our spiritual connection with nature is actually a profound biological legacy. How does this connection exist, you may ask? How does it affect our spiritual and mental state? Behind this, there may be a more subtle messaging involved. In our daily lives, we often hear the term naturopathy, and many people go hiking, traveling, or contacting nature to relax and relieve stress. But have you ever thought that besides these superficial physiological effects, nature may also affect us through certain spiritual signals? These signals are not always direct, but through an underlying resonance that allows us to regulate our mental and emotional well-being. Let's take a simple example. When you walk into a forest, surrounded by birdsong and the rustling of leaves, with sunlight streaming through the branches. The air is fresh. You will find that this environment makes you become more relaxed and in a happy mood. This state of affairs is not only due to the physical environment provided by nature, but is more likely to be a kind of spiritual resonance between you and these natural elements. Some psychologists have pointed out that the human brain has a special response to certain sights and sounds in nature. For example, green plants and the sound of water can stimulate certain neural circuits in our brains that are associated with tranquility and relaxation, thus helping us to relieve anxiety and stress. In addition, scientists have found that nature's effect on our emotions goes far beyond that. Studies have shown that people who are exposed to natural environments experience significant increases in their emotional state, creativity, and cognitive functioning. For example, in 2015, a study in the UK found that people who regularly engaged in outdoor activities had better mental health than those who stayed in cities for long periods of time. One of the reasons for this is that nature provides a kind of emotional regulation that allows people to restore their mental equilibrium in the natural world. Further, the human connection with nature may not be just about relaxation and enjoyment. In fact, many cultures and philosophical systems have long recognized that nature itself possesses a kind of wisdom that is an important part of our spiritual world. Ancient Eastern philosophies, especially Taoism, have always emphasized the harmonious coexistence of man and nature. In Taoist philosophy, heaven and earth and nature have a kind of Tao operation, and man and nature are one and the same. In this philosophical concept, the spiritual world of man is not isolated from the outside world, but maintains a deep connection with the Qi and Tao in nature. It can be said that this connection is far more than physical. It is spiritual, a contract of the heart. Similar ideas are found in Western philosophy. In the theories of the ancient Greek philosopher Plato, he mentioned the connection between the human soul and the universe. He believed that the human soul used to be closely connected to the rational source of the universe before birth, and that this connection still exists after we are born, but it is only obscured by our physical body. Thus, the human soul is somehow not entirely of the physical body, and it maintains some spiritual resonance with the entire universe and nature. Although modern science has not directly verified these philosophical views, a number of studies have shown that there is indeed some kind of deep connection between human thinking and emotions and nature. For example, many psychologists and ecologists have suggested that human contact with nature activates an inner eco-intelligence that helps us make smarter choices in a complex society and environment. Nowadays, however, we seem to be becoming more and more alienated from this spiritual connection with nature. The fast pace of modern life and urbanization have made it difficult for people to find time to get close to nature in their daily work and life. At the same time, environmental problems are becoming more and more serious. Global warming, species extinction, ecological imbalance, and other problems make us realize more and more that the relationship between us and nature is not one-way, but interdependent. Some scholars have put forward the concept of environmental sadness, which describes the pain that human beings feel deep down in their hearts when faced with changes in the ecological environment. In other words, when we see the destruction of nature, we do not only observe it from the outside, but also feel a sense of loss from the inside, as if a part of ourselves is disappearing. This emotional resonance is a reflection of the deep connection between humans and nature. At the same time, more and more psychologists and ecologists have begun to pay attention to how to cultivate ecological empathy. This kind of empathy is not only to understand and care for other creatures, but also to pay attention to and respect the entire ecosystem of the Earth. Through this spiritual connection, human beings need to restore harmony with nature, thus promoting the sustainable development of the Earth's ecology. 3. Cosmic rays and genetic mutation. We live in a world full of radiation, not only from the X-rays or cell phone signals that we come into contact with every day, but also a kind of cosmic rays from outer space. These rays may be an invisible force behind the evolution of life, driving genetic mutation and biodiversity. Doesn't that sound incredible? But in fact, scientists have begun to unravel the mystery in this area. Before we dive into the discussion of the relationship between cosmic rays and genetic mutations, let's first take a brief look at what cosmic rays are. Cosmic rays are actually energetic particles that are constantly flying in from outer space, and they travel at almost the speed of light and have a very high energy. These particles consist mainly of protons, electrons, and some heavier nuclei, and they come from deep in the universe outside our solar system. They can penetrate the Earth's atmosphere and have various collisions with material on the Earth's surface, producing a series of secondary particles. These particles are constantly hitting the environment and living organisms we live in. If you've seen some documentaries or movies about the universe, you may have noticed the effects of radiation on astronauts in space. In fact, not only astronauts, but all living things on Earth are exposed to these cosmic rays on a daily basis, although our atmosphere and magnetic field provide some protection. Okay, now let's get back to the core question. How are cosmic rays related to genetic mutations? At the genetic level, our DNA is actually very fragile. Every moment, DNA can be altered by external radiation, chemicals, or even by faulty replication in natural processes. Such changes are sometimes harmless, but sometimes they can lead to mutations, one of the major sources of biological evolution. And cosmic rays are exactly one external factor that can trigger mutations. When cosmic rays enter the Earth's atmosphere and collide with atoms in the air, they release a large number of secondary particles. These particles, in turn, can further impact the cells of our life forms on Earth, especially our DNA molecules. Although the atmosphere and other barriers absorb these rays to some extent, a fraction of the energetic particles are still able to penetrate these protective layers and go underground, deep into the oceans, and even inside us. Cosmic rays damage DNA directly or indirectly, and one common effect is single-strand breaks or double-strand breaks. The double helix structure of DNA acts as a miniature string, and energetic particles from cosmic rays act as if they are pulling it apart with tremendous force. When such a break occurs, the cell normally initiates a repair mechanism to fix the error. However, sometimes this repair mechanism is not perfect and new mutations are created. These mutations have the potential to affect organisms under certain conditions and even lead to evolutionary changes. Why might cosmic rays drive the evolution of life? We know that one of the central drivers of evolution is mutation. Mutations create genetic diversity, and natural selection determines which mutations survive in a species. Mutations triggered by cosmic rays may be one source of this genetic diversity. Imagine if there were no external factors like cosmic rays affecting DNA, our genome would be relatively stable and lack the ability to change and adapt to new environments. In fact, scientists have discovered through a series of studies that cosmic rays may indeed have played a gas pedal role in driving the evolution of life. Early life forms, especially single-celled organisms, may have had their DNA most directly affected by cosmic rays. In order to adapt to their changing environments, these life forms had to constantly create new genetic variations through mutations. The mutations brought about by cosmic rays, while sometimes random and harmful, may in some cases help certain species gain new advantages. Interestingly, scientists didn't find the relationship between cosmic rays and genetic mutations only in science fiction, but found similar phenomena in reality. For example, in some experiments, scientists used particle gas pedals to simulate high-energy particles from cosmic rays to study their effects on microbial DNA. The results showed that it is indeed these high-energy particles that can trigger mutations and even lead to the evolution of microbes under certain conditions. In addition, NASA once conducted an experiment on the effects of cosmic rays on living things. Scientists exposed some microorganisms to simulated cosmic rays and observed their genetic changes. It was found that these microorganisms had mutations in their genes, and that these mutations were not just damages or mistakes, but that some of the mutations even helped the microorganisms to survive better in the simulated environment. One very interesting story is about a NASA astronaut experiment in the 1970s. At that time, Astronauts were exposed to cosmic rays and other radiation for long periods of time in space, and when they returned to Earth, some of the astronauts' genes changed. Some astronauts experienced slight immune system changes after returning to Earth, and some even showed greater resistance to radiation than normal. Although this experiment did not directly prove that cosmic rays could prompt mutations, it hinted at the potential role of cosmic rays at the genetic level. In the 21st century, with advances in particle physics, genomics, and astrophysics, scientists have been studying cosmic rays and biological genetic mutations in greater depth. For example, researchers have simulated the effects of cosmic rays on model organisms, such as mice or insects, to observe how these rays alter their genetic structure and physiological characteristics. The results showed that the genomes of these organisms did change under the influence of cosmic rays, and some of the mutations were even passed on in the offspring. More interestingly, scientists have begun to formulate the hypothesis that on the early Earth, it may have been these cosmic ray-induced mutations that helped primitive life adapt to changes in the environment over the course of its long evolution. Without cosmic rays, life on Earth would have been in a state of evolutionary stagnation, unable to cope with the dramatic changes in its environment. Therefore, in a sense, cosmic rays are like a driving force behind the evolution of life on Earth. 4. Earthquakes and animal behavior. The relationship between earthquakes and animal behavior has a lot of fascinating details. Someone once made a very interesting point. Animals always seem to be able to sense the arrival of earthquakes in advance, even more sensitive than we humans. This phenomenon has been observed more and more, especially around the time of earthquakes, when animals often become unusually active or quiet in their behavior, or just show some signs of uneasiness. For example, some people have seen the family dog desperately digging the ground before an earthquake, or have seen cats standing on the windowsill, staring intently into the distance, as if in anticipation of something. Even more amazingly, farmers in some places will find that livestock will run to higher ground or away from where they normally stay before an earthquake. There are even reports mentioning that bees will leave their hives in the days leading up to an earthquake, and birds fly extra high or even fly away from their nests. These phenomena make it seem as if animals have some sort of supernatural ability to detect small changes in the Earth's surface before an earthquake occurs. You must be wondering, why do animals have this kind of supernatural sensitivity? It involves a physical phenomenon called infrasound. Simply put, when an earthquake is active, it produces a low-frequency sound wave that is lower in frequency than what we humans can hear. The range of human hearing is roughly between 20 Hz and 20,000 Hz, while infrasound usually has a frequency between 0.001 Hz and 20 Hz. Although we cannot hear these low-frequency sounds, some animals, such as dogs, cats, cows, and even certain insects, have sensory systems that can detect such frequencies. Dogs, for example, have a hearing range of 20 Hz to 40,000 Hz, and they are much more sensitive than our human ears, so they can hear sounds that we cannot. Then again, cats have an even wider hearing range and can perceive infrasound as low as 1 Hz. There are even studies that show that certain cats seem unusually agitated before earthquakes, which may have something to do with the fact that they can perceive faint changes in infrasound. There are other sensory mechanisms besides hearing. Many animals also have a much stronger sense of smell than humans, and the movement of the Earth's crust before an earthquake can trigger the release of some gases, like the leakage of radon gas. Animals may be able to detect these subtle changes through their sense of smell, resulting in some unusual reactions. Going deeper, some animals may be able to react in advance through the perception of ground shaking. While we humans can also sense the ground shaking in the early stages of an earthquake, we usually wait until the tremor is stronger before reacting, whereas animals seem to be able to detect the shaking as soon as it begins. Scientists hypothesize that animals may be so sensitive to such tiny tremors that they can even feel them before they become significant. All of this research actually started with many historical events. Some experts even believe that the unusual behavior of animals may be a natural mechanism for warning of earthquakes. You may ask, can this phenomenon really be explained through science? The answer is complex. The scientific community has yet to reach a completely unified conclusion on the study of this phenomenon. Some of the more notable studies, such as that of Keiko Sato, a Japanese earthquake researcher, have mentioned that she herself has observed unusual reactions from animals during a number of earthquakes. In particular, she noted that before the 1995 Kobe earthquake, many dogs were unusually anxious, and the precursors to the quake didn't attract much attention at the time, resulting in dogs near the epicenter displaying a strong sense of fear. Keiko Sato said, "In the days leading up to the earthquake, my dog always jumped around and acted very uneasy. In fact, earthquakes cannot be predicted, but the behavior of these animals made me begin to wonder if perhaps they already knew something." However, some scientists have put forward a different point of view. They believe that the abnormal behavior of animals before an earthquake is not necessarily due to the perception of some kind of omen, but may be due to changes in certain environmental factors, such as humidity in the air pressure, or even fluctuations in the magnetic field. These factors may affect the behavior of the animals and are not directly related to the occurrence of earthquakes. In other words, there is no clear conclusion from the scientific community as to whether there is really a direct causal relationship between animal behavior and earthquakes. In fact, there are many true stories that provide us with some clues. For example, before the 2004 Indian Ocean earthquake, some fishermen and nearby residents in Thailand once noticed that animals in the neighborhood were exhibiting strange behavior. Groups of local monkeys suddenly disappeared, certain birds flew further away, and even some residents reported that their dogs started growling early and seemed particularly anxious. Although there was no scientific research at the time to prove that these behaviors were directly related to the earthquake, in retrospect, the erratic behavior of these plants and animals seems somewhat intriguing. Of course, in addition to these omens in nature, there are also some animals whose adaptive ability is also surprising. For example, the cat cheetah, they run on flat ground. Speed is comparable to racing cars, but even so, their hunting behavior is very dependent on the subtle ground vibration. Experts have found that cheetahs can rely on the weak vibrations of the ground to determine the location of their prey, and can even accurately predict the trajectory of their prey. In animal behavior, the sensitivity of animals to small changes in the environment has become a very important research field. Scientists believe that this ability of animals may be the result of their long-term symbiotic evolution with nature. Whether through sensation, hearing, sight, smell, or by reacting to vibrations in the ground, animals have developed a very complex perceptual system over millions of years of evolution that is better able to adapt to changes in their surroundings. And this ability to adapt may be an important reason why they are able to detect earthquake precursors. Overall, the relationship between earthquakes and animal behavior is still a topic full of mysteries. Although scientists have put forward many hypotheses and through a series of experiments and observations have accumulated a large amount of data, but there is still no conclusive evidence that animals can predict earthquakes. 5. Trees and underground fungal networks. Did you know that trees and underground fungal networks are like a hidden, magical, underground internet? It not only intrigues humans, but also makes us re-examine the seemingly simple yet intricate connections between plants and organisms in the natural world. Let's start the conversation from the beginning. The discovery of how trees exchange information with their own kind, and even other species, through a network of underground fungi attracted a lot of attention from the scientific community back in the 1990s. At the time, a mycologist named Paul Stamp was studying mushrooms when he discovered a marvelous phenomenon. Trees and plants were able to connect with each other through fungal hyphae, exchanging information and resources. In other words, a fungal web under the ground, like a spider's web, connects the whole forest into a huge network, which is not only a channel for material exchange, but also a bridge for information flow. This network is not only a channel for material exchange, but also a bridge for information flow. What is the underground internet? First of all, we need to understand what is the fungal mycelium. Fungal mycelium is the elongated structure that makes up the fungal body, similar to the root system of plants, but much larger and more intricate. Fungi extend into the soil through these hyphae, forming a vast network that can cover almost the entire subterranean area of a forest. This network not only allows the fungus to obtain nutrients for itself, but it is also closely connected to the root systems of trees and plants, allowing for the exchange of materials. The concept of the underground internet can be visualized as a somewhat sci-fi network, but its function is very realistic. It allows trees to provide nutrients to other trees, especially when environmental conditions are harsh, such as when a tree's roots lack water or minerals, and it can borrow resources from other trees through this network. In addition, the trees can share information among themselves, such as warnings of pest invasions or environmental changes. Through this network, the trees in a forest form an almost cooperative and supportive relationship, helping and replenishing each other. Scientists' earliest understanding of this phenomenon stems from a groundbreaking 1997 study. In a Canadian forest, researchers found that certain trees appeared to be able to exchange resources through an underground network of fungi. It was the interaction between the fungi and the root systems of the trees behind the study that allowed the scientists to unravel the mystery. By tagging and tracking the mycelial networks of trees and fungi, the researchers found that when a tree is attacked by a pest or disease, other trees receive warning signals through the network and begin to produce defensive chemicals to strengthen their resistance. It's like a forest-wide social network at work. One tree sends a message of danger, and the others are able to respond quickly. How do trees know when other trees are in danger, you may wonder? It turns out that trees maintain contact not only through material exchange, but also through chemical signals. For example, when a tree's leaves are bitten by a pest, it releases a gas called ethylene, which is the plant's warning signal. This signal not only travels through the air, but is also transmitted to surrounding trees through a network of fungi underground. In addition, the fungal network also helps the tree to sense changes in the environment. For example, when some trees face climate change, they can use the fungal network to get the reaction of other trees so that they can adjust their growth strategies or work together to cope with external stresses. This underground internet makes the entire forest a collaborative ecosystem where every tree, every patch of land, and even every tiny fungus works together to maintain the health and stability of the forest. Beyond warnings and defenses, the sharing of resources among trees is equally amazing. Trees in forests don't work alone, but support each other through a network of fungi. Studies have found that trees provide nutrients to each other through fungal hyphae, especially when they are in distress. For example, when a tree's roots suffer from drought and can't get enough water, neighboring trees can transfer water to that tree's roots through the fungal network. More interestingly, scientists have found that older trees often provide more nutrients to younger trees, which is considered a nurturing behavior. They act as mothers of the forest, passing nutrients to young trees through a network of fungi to help them thrive. By sharing resources in this way, the trees in the forest are able to maintain a relatively stable ecological balance. For example, stronger trees can accumulate more nutrients when environmental conditions are favorable and then pass them on to trees in need through the fungal network, ensuring that the entire forest survives under different environmental conditions. What's even more amazing is that the relationship between trees and fungi is more than just cooperation. In many cases, fungi are not only intermediaries for trees, but also form a symbiotic relationship with the trees themselves. For example, by binding to the root systems of trees, jungle, mycorrhizal fungi help the trees to absorb minerals and water from the soil more efficiently. In return, the fungus survives on the organic matter provided by the tree. This symbiotic relationship can be described as interdependent. Without the fungus, the tree would not be able to obtain sufficient nutrients, and without the tree, the fungus would not be able to grow and reproduce. Speaking of this phenomenon, you may wonder how this underground internet was discovered by scientists. In fact, scientists did not understand the cooperation between plants in the early days. They were more concerned about the competition between plants, thinking that each tree was competing for sunlight, space, and water. It wasn't until the late 1990s that a series of experiments by German botanist Hartmut Jaster and others revealed the mutually beneficial relationship between trees and fungi. If you want to get an idea of how marvelous this network is, perhaps take a look at some recent anecdotes. In the course of their research, some scientists have discovered that when forests are subjected to external stresses, such as fires or pests and diseases, certain trees are able to quickly release chemical signals that alert neighboring trees to take countermeasures. More interestingly, there was once an experiment in which scientists separated trees in two forests, but connected them through artificially created underground fungal pathways. As a result, far away from the disaster area of the trees can also be in the infestation occurred when the defense reaction, as if they knew the danger in advance. This phenomenon even makes people think of the early warning system. In human society, we get information through the internet, cell phones, television, and other channels, trees also through their own underground internet. The trees also transmit ecological information through their own underground internet in a silent manner. The relationship between trees and underground fungal networks is really an amazing miracle in nature. It not only changes our perception of the plant world, but also makes us re-examine the interconnection of various organisms in the ecosystem. From material exchange to information transfer, from warning to cooperation, the intricate connection between trees and fungi reveals the potential wisdom and mystery of nature. 6. Human microbiome and health. Did you know? Our bodies are home to a vast, almost alien ecosystem, our microbiome. Many people may not realize that these microbes are more than just simple bacteria or viruses, and that their true power is far greater than we can imagine. The most amazing thing is that there are even more microbes in the human body than there are cells in us. Yes, it sounds a bit unbelievable. Our body has about 37.2 trillion cells, and these microbes are about 100 trillion, almost twice as many. These microbes are also extremely diverse, from bacteria and fungi to viruses, archaea, and even parasites, and they're pretty much everywhere, in our intestines, our skin, our mouths, our nasal passages, and even in our eyes and ears. Imagine a very complex, symbiotic society of microorganisms that interact with us on a daily basis. What's even more amazing is that they have a profound effect on our health and even on our moods, immune systems, and digestive systems. And their interactions are sometimes even more complex than the cells in our own bodies. What we call health has long been inextricably linked to the microbiome. What is the relationship between microbes and the immune system? First of all, when it comes to the immune system, did you know that our immune system actually relies on these microorganisms for training? Some studies have found that the microbiota in the body is not only the front line of defense, but also trains our immune system to recognize and respond to foreign invaders. How can this be so amazing, you may ask? Well, it all comes down to one very important concept: immune tolerance. In our immune system, there are cells that specialize in distinguishing between self and non-self substances. These cells normally attack any harmful substances that are considered foreign, such as bacteria, viruses, etc. However, if these immune cells are not correctly immunized, the immune system will not be able to tolerate the substances that are considered foreign. However, if these immune cells are not able to correctly distinguish between self and foreign substances, a so-called dysregulation of the immune system occurs, resulting in diseases such as allergies, rheumatoid arthritis, etc. This training has led to the development of the immune system and the development of the immune system. This training relies on our microbiota, which, through its long-term interaction with the immune system, helps our immune system to establish the correct immune response. In short, it is as if our immune system has spent years in a microbiology classroom, learning how to protect itself without attacking its own normal cells. The gut flora, for example, is a very important teacher of the immune system. They send regular instructions to the immune cells to keep the immune system in tip-top shape. When our gut flora is out of balance, the immune system's response can become erratic, which can lead to autoimmune diseases. You may have heard about the relationship between the gut and health. The gut is not just a place to digest food, it's also a home base for our immune system. Which is made possible by the microorganisms that live in the gut year-round. Studies have shown that the bacteria in the gut stimulate the immune system by coming into contact with the cells of the intestinal lining, helping us to fight off viruses and bacteria. Moreover, there are a wide variety of these microbes, and different types of microbes regulate the immune response in different ways. For example, certain probiotics, such as Bifidobacterium bifidum, promote the growth of immune cells, while others modulate the immune system's ability to fight inflammatory responses. This is why we sometimes take yogurt and probiotic supplements to make our bodies feel better and our immune system stronger. Speaking of the digestive system, we have a huge world of microorganisms in our intestines, which is almost comparable in size to the liver. The number and types of these microbes are different in each person, and because of this, each of our digestive systems has its own unique code. Did you know? In a healthy gut, there are about 100 trillion microorganisms that break down and ferment the food we eat to help us absorb more nutrients. In fact, much of what we can eat is not digested by ourselves at all, but by these microbes for us. For example, many foods contain fiber that the body can't digest and absorb on its own, but these microbes break them down to provide essential short-chain fatty acids that help maintain gut health. Have you ever noticed that whenever we have gastrointestinal discomfort, there is usually something wrong with our gut flora, such as dysbiosis or overgrowth of certain harmful bacteria? This is when the body may experience symptoms such as constipation, diarrhea, and bloating. An interesting story is that scientists once did a study where they transplanted the gut flora of normal people into the intestines of people suffering from indigestion, and surprisingly, the symptoms of these patients improved significantly. While this sounds unbelievable, it is a real research result. Researchers believe that gut microbes are able to break down complex substances in food, helping us to get more energy and nutrients, which in turn promotes health. In addition, the microbes in our gut are helping us synthesize some important vitamins, such as vitamin K and some B vitamins. Without the help of these microbes, our bodies may not be able to effectively utilize some of the nutrients in our food. Therefore, maintaining a balanced gut flora has a direct impact on our overall health. So, do you think our microbes only have a role in the immune system and digestion? In fact, they are also surprisingly linked to emotional and mental health. Surely you've heard of the gut-brain connection? It's not an empty phrase. Scientists have discovered that the gut and the brain communicate with each other through the gut-brain axis. This communication route is very complex and involves the interaction of the nervous system, the immune system, and the endocrine system. The gut flora is an important player in this gut-brain axis. Research has shown that the gut microbiota can directly affect our mood and behavior by altering the levels of neurotransmitters. For example, certain bacteria in the gut synthesize serotonin, a chemical closely related to mood regulation and happiness. About 90% of serotonin is actually synthesized in the gut, not the brain. Therefore, an imbalance in the gut microbiota may lead to a decrease in serotonin synthesis, which can lead to psychological problems such as anxiety and depression. More interestingly, certain microbes are even able to affect our brain function by altering the environment of the gut. Several studies have shown that changes in gut flora are associated with the risk of suffering from depression, anxiety, and even autism. Scientists have also found that giving probiotic supplements to some patients suffering from depression can help ease their symptoms. This finding has shocked many psychologists and neurologists and further confirms the deep connection between the gut and the brain. All these studies show that our relationship with microbes is much closer than we thought. The presence of these microorganisms has permeated every corner of our lives. They are not just our companions, they are the guardians of our health. They help us digest, regulate immunity, synthesize vitamins, and even influence our emotional and psychological state. And all this is just the tip of the microbial iceberg. Scientists are still deepening their research, and perhaps in the near future, we will find out more about the amazing secrets of the human microbiota. It can be said that the human microbiota is like an invisible brain, which silently controls every aspect of our body. 7. Insects and the global food chain. Did you know? In our daily life, there is a kind of miniature heroes, which may be smaller than we think, but play a vital role in the Earth's ecosystem. These little insects are not just the poor buggers or annoying bugs we think of, but they are actually an indispensable bridge in the global food chain. Take bees and beetles, for example. They maintain more than 70% of the planet's crop production through pollination, indirectly affecting global food security. Without their hard work, there would be a lot less delicious fruits, vegetables, and even some food crops on our tables. First and foremost, bees are one of the most common and well-known pollinating insects, but their work goes far beyond that. Bees are a force to be reckoned with in global agricultural production. According to scientists' estimates, honeybees and other pollinating insects bring more than $150 billion in economic value to global agriculture annually. They contribute to the reproduction of most plants by collecting pollen and nectar. Without the pollinating effects of bees, many crops would not be able to reproduce and entire crop production systems would be paralyzed. You may ask, how are bees so important? How exactly do they affect food production? Quite simply, many crops, especially fruits, nuts, vegetables, etc., rely on insects for pollination. For example, apples, blueberries, tomatoes, almonds, cherries, all common foods, are helped by bees and other pollinating insects. Without these insects traveling from flower to flower, the plant's pollen would not be able to make contact with the pollen carrier, and thus the fruit would not be formed. Apples, for example, have hermaphroditic flowers that rely on insects such as bees for pollination. As bees flit from flower to flower collecting nectar and pollen, they carry pollen from one flower to the pistil of another, thus accomplishing pollination. Without the help of bees, apple yields and quality are significantly reduced, and fruit may become misshapen or scarce. Although bees often represent pollination, many other insects actually provide pollination services to crops. Things like butterflies, beetles, flies, and ants are all very important pollinators. Interestingly, studies have shown that certain plants actually prefer certain types of pollinators. For example, some plants prefer beetles because they are heavier and more stable, which allows them to reach deeper into the pollen of the flower, thus increasing the success of pollination. In an interesting study, scientists looked at a plant called goldenrod and found that it was more likely to attract specific beetles. These beetles not only helped pollinate the flowers, but also consumed the pests in the flowers, acting as both volunteer security guards and volunteer pollinators. It's amazing how this multiple role of insects plays a huge role in the ecosystem. In addition, fruit flies and honey flies also play an important role in the ecosystem. Not only are they pollinators of small plants, but they also help plants break down dead organic matter and participate in the nutrient cycle. Seemingly insignificant insects, they work like precision gears to maintain the balance of the ecosystem. It sounds like the role of these insects is very simple, pollinating plants and eating pests. It does not seem to be a noble job. But have you ever thought about what would happen if they disappeared? In fact, the sharp decline in insect populations has become a signal of the global ecological crisis. Over the past few decades, scientists have noticed a worldwide decline in insect populations. In particular, pollinating insects, such as bees and butterflies, are in sharp decline due to climate change, pesticide use, and habitat destruction. This phenomenon not only affects the ecological balance, but also threatens human food production. To cite a concrete example, in Europe and North America, the decline in the number of bees has already led directly to the decline in agricultural production. There are reports that in some areas, farmers have had to hire artificial pollination to make up for the lack of insect pollination. This artificial pollination, while it ensures crop yields, is extremely costly and does not fully replace the efficiency of natural pollination. In 2006, a phenomenon known as colony collapse disorder, CCD, occurred in the United States, where millions of bees mysteriously disappeared in a short period of time. This event shook the world, as bees were not only the workhorses of pollination, but their disappearance signaled a huge challenge for agricultural production. Since then, crop yields in several regions of the world have suffered significant declines, and even some small-scale agricultural producers have faced production difficulties. Not only bees, but also other insect populations have declined, affecting crop growth as well. For example, some insects keep plants healthy by feeding on other pests, and if they disappear, plants can suffer from pest infestations, which in turn affects yields. At the same time, certain insects play a vital role in the health of the soil by providing it with the necessary organic matter to break down. These tiny insects have an impact on humans that goes beyond what we can imagine in our daily lives. They are not just pollinators of plants, they are the invisible link in the global food chain. Without insects, many plants would not be able to reproduce, and the variety of food crops would decrease dramatically. Many animals that depend on plants for food would not be able to survive. These animals, in turn, are a source of food for species higher up the food chain, and eventually, this change would affect the entire ecosystem, even directly affecting the food supply for humans. For example, herbivores depend on plants for their nutrition, and carnivores in turn depend on herbivores for their survival. If there is a shortage of plant supply, the number of herbivores will also drop drastically, which in turn affects the food source of carnivores, ultimately creating a vicious cycle that threatens the stability of the global food chain. More importantly, the role of insects is not only limited to the food chain, they also have an irreplaceable role in maintaining ecological diversity and promoting population reproduction. Through pollination, predation, and organic matter decomposition, insects help plants and animals thrive and maintain the stability of the Earth's ecosystem. When these tiny heroes disappear, the balance of the ecosystem may collapse. In the face of declining insect populations, scientists and environmental organizations have begun to take action. Some countries have begun restricting the use of certain pesticides to minimize insect damage. At the same time, some farmers and agricultural experts are trying to adopt more friendly agricultural methods, such as growing diverse plants, using biopesticides, and protecting insect habitats. Also, increasing public awareness of the importance of insects is a very crucial measure. Many people are not aware of the important role that bees and other insects play in agriculture. Well, that's it for this installment. Feel free to like and comment. Thanks for watching.